Hello and good morning. You're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. US and Iran exchange fresh missiles and drone strikes, jeopardizing a new ceasefire agreement. US hosts a fourth round of peace talks with Israel and Lebanon. And a fatal stabbing case in the UK sparks protest and debate over policing. First, this morning, a fragile ceasefire between Iran and the United States is under renewed strain after fresh missile and drone attacks across the Gulf. While most of the strikes were intercepted or failed, the latest escalation highlights how far both sides remain from turning a tentative peace agreement into a lasting deal. Here's more on this recent development.
Gulf tensions escalated sharply on Wednesday as Iranian missiles and drones targeted sites linked to US interests across the region. US Central Command said 2 missiles fired toward Kuwait fell short or broke apart in flight, while 3 missiles heading for Bahrain were intercepted. Several other ballistic missiles aimed at regional targets also failed. CENTCOM said US forces downed Iranian drones targeting civilian ships in Gulf waters and American forces in Kuwait. It also carried out strikes on Iran's Qeshm Island near the Strait of Hormuz after what it described as attempted Iranian missile and drone attacks. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps said it had targeted the US 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, along with an airbase and helicopters in another regional country. The IRGC said the attacks were a response to a US strike on a communications tower south of Qeshm. The latest escalation lifted oil prices by more than 1% in early trading. It comes more than 3 months after the initial US and Israeli strikes on Iran, with the conflict still locked in a stalemate under a fragile ceasefire, and the Strait of Hormuz largely closed to maritime traffic. Although Washington and Tehran said last week they had reached a tentative agreement to end the war, the deal has not been finalized. Iranian media report there has been no contact with the United States for several days, while President Donald Trump says negotiations are continuing. The IRGC says its forces remain on the highest level of alert and insists Iran's military strength and control of the Strait of Hormuz remain intact.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Al Jazeera website and what it has. It's doing live updates with Iran war. Live, US hits Iran's Qeshm, says Tehran targeted Kuwait and Bahrain. That was our leading story this morning. So I don't need to go into much detail, but just as a quick overview, the US and Iran have exchanged fresh missiles and drone strikes. Overnight, US forces fired a Hellfire missile to disable a tanker attempting, is what they've said, to break through the American blockade of the Strait of Hormuz on Tuesday. They later said that they repelled an Iranian reprisal attacks in the region and attack sites on Iran's Qeshm Island. Now, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps said it attacked the US 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain in response to the strike on the island, a claim that the US military Central Command has denied. Now, the latest exchange of strikes underline the lack of political progress in resolving the Middle East crisis, as I'm sure you can imagine, as this has been going on for over 2 months now. Now, the US Home Secretary Marco Rubio reiterated claims on Tuesday that a deal with Tehran was within reach and claimed that the regime had agreed to negotiate aspects of its nuclear program, which they had refused to do previously before. So he believes that we're making good progress in relation to this. However, these recent strikes now might abandon that particular progress. Rubio also mentioned that, in direct contrast to the messaging, is what Iran is saying, that this might still stall with the recent attacks based on what the US has done. But we'll keep you informed throughout the day to find out exactly if there's any more information we get out of this ongoing war between the US, Iran, and obviously as well as Lebanon and Israel. Okay, now let's turn to our next story, and that's on Euro News, and that's in relation to Kenya. We ran this story yesterday, but there has been an update because 2 people shot dead in Kenyan protests against Ebola plan. This video will show some of the protesting that happened in Kenya, in the capital really yesterday, but this happened in central Kenya, the town of Nanyuki, due to protests against US plans to establish an Ebola isolation center at the military base nearby. Now, one of the victims was shot in the area close to the Laki Pia Air Base, where a demonstration was taking place, and the other victim was already dead when he was taken to hospital by soldiers. Now, the circumstances of their death are still not clear, and officials have not commented on the matter. Now, just to remind you, but we will provide you with more information later on, is that the US plan to establish an Ebola treatment facility in Kenya, which is what has sparked public concern about cross-border infection risks. And the isolation center is to be staffed by US medics and to treat US citizens affected by the current outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, Kenya has not recorded any Ebola cases so far, and it's also why the public are so outraged, because they don't want any form of spreading to their nation. So that's why on Monday, hundreds of demonstrators marched through the streets of the town, blocking roads and burning tires. As we can see here, a lot of protests and army officials out there as well, trying to quell any type of uprising, and then saying that this is the reason why we see Laki PP, which is near the airport base as well. So they were blocking roads, burning tyres, with police firing tear gas to disperse them. Now, last Friday, the High Court said that the opening of the centre should be halted after a rights group opened a case alleging the facility posed grave and imminent risks to public health. Now, the President William Ruto, defended the plan, saying that Kenya had actually deployed every arsenal to protect the country. He then went on to further say that the US government had requested Kenyan support in dealing with the virus, which he promptly accepted, describing it as a mutual benefit, adding that we are a responsible government. We know what we are doing. But we'll keep you updated into that to see whether or not these protests are listened to and whether or not this is halted and a suspension is granted, and maybe the US isn't able to come over with its medical team to treat its citizens who have been infected by the deadly virus. Okay, now let's turn over to our next story this morning, and that's alongside more protests, because on the BBC they're leading with this story. Henry Nowak arrest footage raises serious questions for police, its Prime Minister says. So Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says there are serious questions for the police after release of body cam footage showed how officers responded to the murder of a teenager called Henry Nowak. Here you can see handcuffed. Now, if we keep scrolling down, there's some footage of the protests. Now, Henry Nowak was killed by multiple stab wounds by a 23-year-old called Vikram Digwa, who was jailed on Monday for a minimum of 21 years, which is why we now have extra footage in relation to this particular case. Now, the body cam footage shows the 18-year-old Southampton University student being handcuffed and telling police that he couldn't breathe after Digwa lied to police officers at the scene of the stabbing, claiming that he had been part or a victim of a racist attack. Now, on Tuesday evening, several hundred people gathered in Southampton, with clashes between protesters and riot police. And I'm sure we will get to the video very shortly, but just to add, quite a few hundreds of people came out in uproar just because of the footage that they saw in relation to this particular stabbing. Now, the UK Home Secretary has described the unrest as completely unacceptable, adding that the Nowak family had made a powerful call on Monday to not let Henry's death be used to create further division or hatred or tension. Now, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said that the question of how accusations of racism informed decision-making must be addressed, which is the priority that he is actually calling on. So now the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, said an investigation into the police force's actions was ongoing. And as you can see here on the screen, some of the protests that you can see here. So you have police on one side and a number of individuals on the other in relation to the protests, and using a number of force, but barricading areas and trying to use anything. As you can see, someone trying to pick up a brick there. Now, it is expected that this investigation, the report, will be made known within the next 3 months as to this inquiry as to how the police responded to this particular incident, which resulted in the death of a 18-year-old man. Here we are, some of the pictures online. So this happened on Tuesday evening, as you can see there. Quite a few hundreds of people coming out in protest due to how they felt watching that body cam footage, and it was the police body cam footage that we saw there. Okay, now let's turn to our next story, and that's on the New York Times website, and that's in relation to a $1.8 billion fund, which has been making the rounds for the last couple of weeks. Now, the change is quite significant because Blanche says Justice Department won't proceed with Trump's $1.8 billion fund. And you might be thinking, what is this all about? I don't understand what the billion fund is and all that kind of stuff. So I'm here to just give you a bit of an overview into that. So the US Acting Attorney General, who is Mr. Blanche, this man here coming onto your screen, said that he was withdrawing a proposal to create a $1.8 billion fund to compensate people claiming to be victims of unfair prosecution in the US. Now, this comes after ongoing pressure from Republicans. So Trump had actually put this money aside to give to those who he felt deserved it because of the unfair way they were treated by the prosecution system in the US. Now, what's now happened is that it's now been withdrawn because of ongoing Republican pressure. They saw it as ethical and a political disaster. The US Acting Attorney General said that we are not moving forward with the fund anymore, adding that the fund proposal would be permanently withdrawn. Now, opponents had described the proposal as a slush fund for allies of President Donald Trump, which is something that they no longer are basically wanting to put that out in the media. So they've removed it completely following this particular announcement made yesterday evening. Okay. Well, that's your morning press roundup and headlines so far. Now we're going to take a short break. When I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global story. Make sure you stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. Now we head over to the US following a partial ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, whereas representatives from both sides have meet for talks in Washington. This comes as hostilities between the two neighboring countries continue to be reported. Here's more.
Representatives from Lebanon and Israel met at the US Department of State on Tuesday for the first session of a two-day round of negotiations. Following the meeting, the United States said progress had been made in the discussions. The talks come amid escalating tensions between the two neighbours who have been engaged in a 3-month war. Israel continued its attacks in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, but did not strike Beirut following a partial ceasefire agreement with the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah. The Israeli military also said it had intercepted 2 projectiles fired into northern Israel. A Lebanese official said the talks in Washington would explore ways to strengthen the fragile ceasefire, possibly through a phased approach. According to the official, the discussions could lead to the establishment of pilot zones, geographic areas where hostilities would cease, Israeli troops would withdraw, and Lebanese soldiers would be deployed. Meanwhile, a United Nations peacekeeper vehicle convoy was seen near the Israel-Lebanon border on Tuesday, while an Israeli military presence remained in the area. The developments come after UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said peacekeepers would be needed in Lebanon after the current mission's mandate expires at the end of the year.
Now over to Mexico, and it says that it supports extending the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement for another 16 years as talks continue on renewing the regional trade pact. Economy Minister said on Tuesday that Mexico's position is the agreement to be extended, although he noted that the current treaty will remain in force for several more years. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the Trump administration does not want Afghans stranded in Qatar to be forced back to Afghanistan, adding that Washington has spoken with at least 5 countries that may be willing to receive them. Here's what he had to say.
So we're engaging every single day, and we think we have a number of other countries that are willing to. Now, the question is not countries willing to assume. The question is how many. We have about 1,000-something people there, and we have to move them. And so I don't think there's one country that's going to take all 1,000. But it has to be countries that, A, are willing to assume some of this responsibility in numbers that are manageable to them, but also places that give more options to these individuals that they would be comfortable going to. So we are very actively engaged in this. As you know, we have a lot of Capitol Hill engagement on this issue from both sides of the aisle. It's a priority for a lot of people. And we don't want to see a situation where any of them are being forced back into Afghanistan, because that's just clearly not an option for some of them.
Now, global displacement has reached a record high with over 117 million people forced to flee their homes, according to a new report from the Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. The figure doubled in 10 years. The report says most displaced people stay within their own regions or neighboring countries, mainly in poorer nations, while countries like Germany are tightening immigration rules. It also finds climate change is a major driver, with about 30 million people displaced in 2025 due to extreme weather. Researchers also say a mix of political conflict, economic stress and inequality is fueling the rise. Now to Europe, and Hungary's new government is stepping up efforts to rebuild ties with both Kyiv and Brussels. And its Prime Minister Peter Major says a meeting with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky could happen soon. Let's hear from our correspondent Anita Sharma with more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar says he's ready to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as early as next week. But the talks hinge on resolving a years-long dispute over the rights of Hungary's ethnic minority in western Ukraine. If an agreement can be reached, the meeting would mark the highest-level contact between Budapest and Kyiv since Magyar's landslide election victory ended Viktor Orbán's 16-year rule in April. Speaking alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in Berlin, Magyar said he's optimistic that negotiations can produce a breakthrough. The minority rights issue has long been one of the biggest obstacles to Hungary backing Ukraine's path toward EU membership. Now, Merz welcomed the improvement in relations between Budapest and Kyiv, but argued that the dispute should not be allowed to delay Ukraine's accession talks. The German Chancellor also praised Hungary's return to what he called democratic and European values. The two leaders discussed Ukraine's future relationship with the EU as Kyiv continues its push toward membership. The proposed meeting with Zelensky comes as Magyar intensifies efforts to bring Hungary back into the European mainstream after years of tensions with Brussels under Orbán. Following talks with Merz in Berlin, Magyar is set to meet French President Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace today. The diplomatic push has already helped secure the release of 16.4 billion euros in previously frozen EU funds. If Hungary and Ukraine can resolve their differences over minority rights, a Magyar-Zelensky meeting would not only reset relations between the two neighbors, but also underscore Hungary's broader return to the heart of European politics. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now turning to the UK, and hundreds in the city port of Southampton in England have come out in protest after an 18-year-old man was stabbed and later died in handcuffs at the scene last December. Henry Nowak was fatally stabbed by 23-year-old Vikram Digwa, who was sentenced to life in prison on Monday. Recent police body cam footage shows Nowak telling officers he had been stabbed and could not breathe, while an officer appeared to doubt his injuries, which has sparked strong criticism on British policing. Digwa had falsely claimed he was the victim of a racist attack. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says there are serious questions about whether those allegations influence police actions.
And this is understandable.
Now to East Asia, and torrential rain brought by tropical storm lashed Tokyo on Wednesday morning, with some rivers along central Tokyo overflowing. At least 16 people were injured and thousands left without power after Storm Tangmu blew through Okinawa on Monday. At least 700 domestic and international flights have also been grounded at 2 of Tokyo's airports, according to local media. Evacuation warnings and landslide warnings have been issued for parts of Japan's eastern coastal region. The United Nations Weather Agency says a developing El Niño could raise temperatures and increase the risk of extreme weather in the months ahead, as warming Pacific waters signal changing conditions. The World Meteorological Organization forecasts above average temperatures in most parts of the world from June through to August, with conditions likely to continue until November. Officials say warmer oceans can intensify heat waves and heavy rainfall while disrupting regional climate patterns. The WMO says uncertainty remains, with some models not predicting a strong El Niño.
Warmer ocean adds heat and moisture to the climate system, which can serve to worsen climate extremes, including heat waves and heavy rainfall. The strong El Niño of 2023-2024 added a temporary warming effect on top of an already long-term warming trend. This contributed to 2024 becoming the hottest year on record.
2 people have been shot dead in Kenya protests against a US-backed plan to establish a proposed Ebola quarantine facility in central Kenya. The proposal has sparked public anger, a court case and street demonstrations, with locals saying they fear the facility could put the community at risk.
Hundreds of people protested in Nanyuki, central Kenya on Monday, against plans to establish an Ebola quarantine facility at a nearby military base. The demonstrations brought parts of the town to a standstill, with protesters burning tyres, blocking roads and chanting "one term" as they marched through the streets. Police in anti-riot gear were deployed as tensions grew. Residents say they reject the proposed quarantine centre and do not want it placed near their community.
We are not happy with the national government and the leaders of Laikipia County, all elected leaders. There is none that has shown up for the protest, because this is a great tragedy not only for Kenya, but the whole continent of Africa.
The planned facility has been described in reports as a 50-bed quarantine centre for US citizens who may have been exposed to Ebola. Kenya's High Court has temporarily suspended the plan after legal challenges raised concerns over public health risks and consultation.
Now turning to France, and French President Emmanuel Macron is set to host Hungary's new Prime Minister Peter Magyar at the Elysee Palace on Wednesday. The two leaders are expected to discuss support for Ukraine, sanctions on Russia and European security. Magyar, who came to power in early May, has made restoring Hungary's position within the European mainstream a centre pillar of his foreign policy, following years of friction between Budapest and EU institutions. Staying on this topic, the upcoming meeting underscores the two countries' commitment to strengthening cooperation in key areas and bolstering European security. Joining me now from Baku to further discuss this is Orkan Nabiev, political analyst. Welcome to the program.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. My first question to this is, Peter Magyar is definitely spearheading meetings with a number of different EU countries and positioning himself very differently to his predecessor, Viktor Orban. What is Magyar's goal or strategy in all of this?
First of all, Prime Minister Peter Magyar is posing himself as not as a Eurosceptic. Yes, he's a conservative as a previous government. He's a representative of the Conservative Party. He was a member of Fidesz party, but now he's not positioning himself as a person who is against the European Union. Rather, his visit was to the Warsaw, then it was to Austria, Brussels, Berlin. Now he's in France, in Paris. So these meetings shows that Peter Magyar is wanting to become a part of the European Union, coming back to the European family. And one of the most of the meetings during his visit was about security and cooperation, especially securitization of the European Union within considering the war Russia against Ukraine.
And that's quite interesting. Obviously, he definitely doesn't want to be a European skeptic. And also, Ursula von der Leyen has also mentioned that now funding will be released to Hungary just because of the different ways that he's coming in and taking over the government and making sure that it aligns with EU strategy. How important is that money for Hungary?
Yeah, that's very important for Hungary. Like, it was the primary objective of Peter Magyar, is to unblocking 80 billion in frozen European Union funds and secured 16 billion in defense loans that were withheld from the Hungary because of the rule of law violations under the Orban regime, under Orban rule. So it's 18 billion for the economic support, economic development, and 16 million for the defense, and their loans. It means that a very big economic boosting, not only for the economy, but also the boosting for the military economy of Hungary, and it will help with the unemployment rate, it will help with the social security rate, it will help the economic development rate, and yes, and that's the first reason why the Hungarian citizens vote for Peter Magyar, because Peter Magyar promised that when he will come to the government, he will work with the European Union to unfreeze this money.
Yes, and just with that, why is working with EU member states, member countries, important to him? If we just put the money to one side, why is this important to his government and his leadership?
Because Hungarian citizens, they feel themselves, they feel them as a European Union member. They feel them as European family. Hungary was one of the main cornerstones of the European Union, and the European Union Central and Eastern Europe, spreading the European values, but also the be like an enlargement of the European Union. And considering that the Hungary was in the Budapest was the main city for consolidating the Visegrad and consolidating the Visegrad Union. There, as you know, there are the four countries: Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And this is the main core for the European Eastern enlargement, and having this country again back to the European family will help the European Union in their eastern boundaries. At the same time, will give back the Hungarians the European identity, and they will start to feel again the full members of the European Union.
Yes, and it was, as you mentioned, it's a call from a lot of the Hungarians who voted in favour for Peter Magyar's government because they wanted to align themselves closer to the European Union. Now, what does Hungary's new position now mean for the EU? Is this a weapon in its push against Russia and the war in Ukraine? What else might Hungary provide to other EU states?
Hungary can provide to other European states stability and stable voting. As you know, and as the viewers know, European Union is a union where the voting should be consolidated. All votes should be or for or against. If one country will be against voting, it will be not considered as a happened. That's why having the stable and pro-European Hungary will make European more consolidated, will make the European more focused on the not internal but enemies from outside. That's not the enemies but the threats from outside. And this Hungary is a warranty for the European Union and for European security and defense.
Okay, and just on that, finally, Hungary's overall is positioning itself a lot closer to the EU, as we've mentioned. But what does that mean for its relationship with Russia? Viktor Orban was very close pals with President Vladimir Putin. Now, a new change of leadership might mean something very different. And as we can see, Peter Magyar has been more to leading on the EU side rather than the Russian side. What will that mean for their future relationship?
It means that Russia lost one of its imposters in the European Union. Imposters, that there's another one is like Fico that remained in the as a government in the Slovakia, but Viktor Orban was the main imposter in the European Union that not only had the sympathy towards the Russian Federation, but at the same time, as we saw from the opened the documents that unsealed the intelligence documents of their telephone spoke with the Vladimir Putin, and the telephone spoke of the Peter Siarto, the foreign minister, with Lavrov, that they were implementing their order, and losing this government, losing the Hungary, it will mean a lot for the Russian Federation, that they will lose a big part of their influence in the European Union.
Yeah, which is, I'm sure, something Vladimir Putin is not too pleased about. But thank you so much for joining me this morning,
Thank
Mr.
you
Nabiev.
for hosting me.
No problem. Thank you again. Now to a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional stories, and we'll be joined later on in the programme to discuss some of them in more detail. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the local stories this morning, and we head first to Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan and the US has held their first economic dialogue in Baku on Tuesday alongside Baku Energy Week. The talks focused on trade, investment, energy security and artificial intelligence, with several agreements signed on digital infrastructure and technology cooperation. Officials also announced that Baku will host the world's second US AI Week later this year. The discussions were followed by a joint press briefing outlining its new commercial agreements.
For us and colleagues.
I was pleased to sign a framework agreement with Azerbaijan and Minister Jabarov on strengthening critical minerals supply chains, which is part of the United States' ongoing effort, together with our partners and allies, to reshape the global market for critical minerals and rare earths. It was also very gratifying to witness the long list of commercial agreements signed during the ceremony between the U.S. private sector and SOCAR, and the additional commercial agreements signed here at the Ministry of the Economy today. I think in grand total, the commercial deals signed on this trip alone total over $8 billion, and all of that is thanks to President Trump's historic commitment to peace in this region and President Aliyev's statesmanship. This is a flourishing relationship, and this is only the beginning.
I think we have to be very straightforward. We are targeting to be an advanced user of the technologies that emerge, to have access for economic development and social development reasons to this technology, but also, and not less important, is developing our own ecosystem, which in the field of cloud hosting, in the field of new innovative uses that use cases may bring, developing national learning language model. Just a few days ago there was an announcement coming jointly from Ministry of Science and Education and Ministry of Digital Transformation and Transport on the cooperation with OpenAI with respect to learning language models. These are all examples of practical cooperation, and I'm sure in coming month there will be much more examples on that.
Now, participants at the Baku conference focusing on the June 1984 Amritsar events have visited the Ashteshka temple complex. During the visit, guests were briefed on the temple's historical links with Sikh merchants and pilgrims from India in the 17th and 18th centuries. The conference is organized by the Baku Initiative Group and is expected to discuss Indian government's repressive policies against ethnic minorities, minority rights, and cooperation between diaspora organizations.
To God and through justice.
Over to Turkey, and intelligence chief has held talks with a senior Hamas delegation in Ankara as efforts continue to advance a fragile Gaza ceasefire and increase humanitarian aid deliveries to the Palestinian enclave. The meeting comes amid renewed fighting in Gaza and growing international concern over the future of ceasefire talks. Our correspondent Adam Maro reports from Istanbul.
Turkey is continuing its diplomatic engagement on the Gaza file, with its national intelligence chief, Ibrahim Kalin, holding talks in Ankara on Monday with a senior Hamas delegation. According to Turkish security sources, Kalin met Hamas Shura Council Chairman Mohammed Derwish and members of the group's political bureau to discuss the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire process. At the meeting, Hamas officials said they were complying with the ceasefire terms and briefed Kalin on what they described as Israeli violations to the agreement. The two sides also discussed Israeli military actions in Gaza during the recent Eid al-Adha holiday. Officials reviewed possible steps to prevent further truce violations, ensure implementation of commitments made in the first phase of the ceasefire, and maintain momentum in the negotiation process. Talks also focused on humanitarian assistance, including Turkish efforts in coordination with regional countries and international agencies to facilitate the delivery of badly needed aid supplies into the Gaza Strip. Monday's meeting was the latest in a series of contacts between Turkish officials and Hamas representatives as Ankara seeks to maintain its role as a mediator and guarantor in the ceasefire efforts. Turkey has repeatedly advocated a permanent ceasefire, expanded humanitarian access, and a negotiated settlement to the conflict. The discussions come at a critical time for Gaza, where ceasefire talks remain fragile and international mediators continue efforts to prevent broader regional escalation, while also seeking a longer-term framework for peace and reconstruction. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turning to East Asia now, and China says it is continuing efforts to help ease tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan through diplomacy. Beijing's special envoy for Afghanistan has met Pakistan's special representative in Islamabad as talks continue under China-facilitated Umrah process. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details.
China's special envoy for Afghanistan, Wei Xiaoying, has said he met Pakistan's special representative for Afghanistan, Mohammad Sadiq, in Islamabad. According to Xiaoying, the two sides held constructive discussions on the Urumqi process, which involves Afghanistan and Pakistan and is being facilitated by China. The talks come at a time when efforts are continuing to resolve tensions between Kabul and Islamabad. On Sunday, the deputy spokesperson of Afghanistan said the door to dialogue with Pakistan remains open. He added that efforts to address differences through diplomacy are still ongoing. The meeting in Islamabad is being seen as part of wider regional efforts to encourage communication between Afghanistan and Pakistan. China has been playing a facilitating role in the process with the aim of supporting dialogue and reducing tensions between the two neighboring countries. For now, Afghan officials say they remain open to talks while diplomatic engagement through regional channels continues. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
The Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway has officially entered a new phase following a major modernization project. The upgraded line was commissioned at a ceremony held in southern Georgia. Officials from the country, Azerbaijan and Turkey say the project significantly increases freight capacity and strengthens the middle corridor. Our correspondent reports from Georgia.
We are here in a Halkalaki where representatives of Georgia, Azerbaijan and Turkey gathered to mark the commissioning of the modernized Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway. The project is considered one of the most important transport infrastructure links in the South Caucasus and a key component of the middle corridor connecting China, Central Asia and Europe. According to Azerbaijan Railways, modernization works on the Georgian section have increased the railway's annual freight capacity from 1 million to 5 million tons. The project included the rehabilitation of railway stations, bridges, power systems and logistics infrastructure, as well as the construction of new rail segments and supporting facilities. Addressing the event, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Qobakhidze and Economy Minister Mariam Krivishvili thanked Azerbaijan's Minister of Digital Development and Transport, Rashad Nabiev, for the close cooperation between the two countries throughout the project. Officials described the railway as an example of successful regional partnership.
This project, along with others, is the best demonstration of how closely our three countries cooperate with one another. This is a strategic partnership and a close friendship that binds us together. Of course, in the future, Georgia will continue to place great emphasis on implementing joint projects and deepening relations with both Azerbaijan and Turkey. This remains one of our top priorities.
This project also is very important from the regional cooperation. Three countries, Turkey, Georgia and Azerbaijan, jointly concluded and closed this project. So from the transit capacity perspective, this project is very important. And we hope that the benefits of this project will not be used only by the regional countries, but also starting from China and into Europe, all the countries which located across this route.
Beyond the railway itself, Georgian officials highlighted broader infrastructure development, including the Anaklia deep sea port and the East-West highway. Together, these projects are expected to strengthen Georgia's position as a regional transit and logistics hub and increase the competitiveness of the Middle Corridor. Speakers from all three countries emphasized that the significance of the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway extends beyond Georgia, Azerbaijan and Turkey. They noted that improved connectivity benefits all states participating in the Middle Corridor and stressed that stable, peaceful regional cooperation remains essential for unlocking the corridor's full economic potential. Nini Nikolaishvili, Achal Kawaki, A News.
Now, Central Asia's biggest environmental gathering is underway in Samarkand, bringing together thousands of delegates focused on climate, water and sustainability. The exhibition is also driving new regional partnerships. Our correspondent, Sevil Rajapova, has the details.
The International Environmental Exhibition Eco-Expo Central Asia 2026 has officially opened in Samarkand. Organizers expect around 10,000 local and international participants this year. More than 68 pavilions are showcasing environmental technologies, green products and innovative solutions, while over 50 forums, presentations and side events are being held throughout the exhibition.
Our Central Asian region must unite and is already uniting in matters of ecology and environmental protection. As we know, environmental challenges do not recognize borders, which means that no country can solve them alone.
One of the key outcomes of the first day came during a discussion dedicated to the IRGC region. The National Committee on Ecology and Climate Change, the Ministry of Water Resources and the Ministry of Agriculture signed a concept plan for integrated water resource management in the lower Amu Darya basin. The document aims to improve water efficiency, strengthen environmental sustainability and support climate adaptation efforts in the region.
Like if we take Central Asia, the intensity of this heating or the climate change is double the global trends. So that's why we live in an arid region. We have some intensifying factors like RLC, sun and dust storms. It is a big issue, but...
Another major side event marked the launch of a new global environment facility funded project aimed at establishing Uzbekistan's national biosafety system in line with the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. The initiative is expected to strengthen biodiversity protection and improve the country's environmental governance framework.
And we're actually inaugurating or launching a big regional project this week with Uzbekistan and all of its Central Asian neighbors, helping to tackle the common challenges associated with land and water management, in the Sir Darya and the Amu Darya river basins.
The exhibition also featured discussions on Uzbek-Japanese cooperation in climate resilience, water management and green hydrogen technologies, as well as the presentation of Uzbekistan's fourth Environmental Performance Review, prepared by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. EcoExpo Central Asia 2026 is expected to strengthen international environmental partnerships, attract investment into green projects, and support sustainable development initiatives across the region. It is Cyril Rajab reporting from Samarkand, Uzbekistan, A News.
And we go from Central Asia to East Asia, and military officials from the United States and China have met in Hawaii to discuss ways to improve safety and communication during air and maritime encounters. Our correspondent Manor Makdoum has more from Beijing.
Representatives from the Chinese and US militaries met in Hawaii from May 28 to 29 and held what the Chinese Navy described as candid and constructive exchanges on air and maritime safety. According to the Chinese side, both countries agreed that maintaining communication can help reduce misunderstandings, avoid miscalculations, and enhance professionalism during military encounters. China also stressed its firm opposition to any actions that undermine its sovereignty and safety. For its part, the US Indo-Pacific Command said that the discussions focused on reducing the risk of unsafe and unprofessional interactions between the two militaries. The meeting was held in Honolulu and brought together representatives from the People's Liberation Army and the US military. The talks followed the last month's summit between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump in Beijing, where the two leaders agreed to pursue what they called a constructive relationship of strategic stability. Analysts said that the agreement could help establish clearer boundaries for managing competition and preventing crisis. The meeting also comes after the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum in Singapore, where US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth voiced concerns over China's military modernization while calling on Asian countries to strengthen their defense capabilities. At the same time, Hegseth noted that US-China relations are in a better state than they have been in years. Both sides agreed to continue communication through military channels, with observers viewing such exchanges as an important mechanism for maintaining stability and avoiding unintended incidents in the region. Mani Makdoum, A News, Beijing.
Now to South America, and anti-government protests in Bolivia have entered their 33rd day, with multiple roadblocks reported across the country. This comes as the country's defense minister stepped down on Tuesday. Let's see this report.
Unrest in Bolivia has continued for more than a month as union leaders and social organizations gathered in El Alto on Tuesday. Protesters have been calling for the resignation of President Rodrigo Paz while demanding the government reverse austerity measures and address rising living costs. Authorities say the demonstrations have resulted in at least 90 roadblocks across 7 of Bolivia's 9 departments, disrupting the supply of goods and fuel.
We are not going to give up because the government no longer listens to what we're going to do. If they want to leave, let them leave now. That is what we need. There is nothing left to buy, no vegetables, chicken or meat. They are too expensive. A family with several children has nothing to eat. It is the people who suffer.
We're all out of work. What are we going to do? It's a real shame. I haven't been able to work for a month. I live off my travels, and now here I have to stand in line for an egg.
Amid the ongoing unrest, Bolivia's defense minister stepped down on Tuesday, marking the highest level resignation so far. Local media also reported the resignation of the country's education minister. Last week, Paz took steps towards declaring a state of emergency that could see troops deployed to the streets to restore calm. Officials say the government is prioritizing dialogue with protesters, but added that other measures could be considered to address the roadblocks.
It's now time for a break. When I return, I have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm the host, Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. US and Iran exchange fresh missiles and drone strikes, jeopardizing a new ceasefire agreement. US hosts a fourth round of peace talks with Israel and Lebanon. And a fatal stabbing case in the UK sparks protests and debate over policing. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Euronews and what they're reporting on their website, with 2 people shot dead in Kenya. Protests against Ebola plan. Now, we covered this story yesterday, but this has been the most recent update because of what's been taking place now. This happened in the central Kenyan town of Nanyuki due to protests against US plans to establish an Ebola isolation center at the military base nearby. Now, one of the victims who was shot close to the actual airbase area where the demonstration was taking place, and the other victim was already dead when he was taken to hospital by soldiers. Now, the circumstances of their deaths are not clear at this current moment, and officials have not commented on the matter either. Just to give you an overview of why this is taking place, the US actually planned to establish an Ebola treatment facility in Kenya, which is what has sparked public concern and outrage about the cross-border infection rates. And the isolation center would be staffed by US medics who would then treat US citizens affected by the current outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But currently, Kenya has not recorded any Ebola cases so far. So a lot of people there are actually quite upset by this current proposal that the government has decided to take on. Now, that's why on Monday, hundreds of demonstrators, as you can see from this particular video footage, marched through the streets of the town, blocking roads and burning tyres, with police firing tear gas to disperse them. And last Friday, the High Court said that the opening of the centre should be stopped after a rights group opened a case alleging the facility posed a grave and imminent risk to public health. Now, on this, the president has recently spoke out, William Ruto, defending, this is the president here, Ruto defending the plan, saying that Kenya had deployed every arsenal to protect the country, and told journalists that the US government had requested Kenyan support in dealing with the virus, which he had promptly accepted, describing it as a mutual agreement and adding, we are a responsible government, we know what we are doing. However, this has not gone down very well, and a lot of protesters are still very upset with a potential risk of any form of the Ebola virus spreading to other parts of the country. Okay, and let's turn over to our next headline this morning. It's a bit different. It's more weather related, but it's on the BBC website, and it's in relation to hailstones, because strong winds and heavy rain and hailstones the size of golf balls hammered US city capital of Denver, Colorado. So this video here shows these hailstones plummeting down, as you can see here, and during an afternoon on Tuesday, and just how big they are. I mean, come on, little golf balls, well, not little golf balls, but you wouldn't want to be caught outside with all of this. And as you can imagine, it wasn't just a few. It was a lot, a major hailstorm on Monday. The storm hit the city and the surrounding area in the afternoon, causing disruption on the roads and delays at Denver International Airport. Footage showing huge hailstones, as you can see on screen, some 1 or 2 inches in diameter, battering cars and homes across the region. There we are. There we can see it. Right, now let's go over to our next headline this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera. And that's the top story that we are leading with today. And US-Iran intensify attacks as ceasefire phrase, peace talks stall. So just a very quick overview. The US and Iran have exchanged fresh missiles and drone strikes, and the US has full forces fired Hellfire missiles to disable a tanker attempting to break through the American blockade of the Strait of Hormuz on Tuesday. They later said that they repelled Iranian reprisal attacks in the region and attacked sites on Iran's Qeshm Island. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, said it attacked the US 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain in response to the strike on the island. And it's actually a claim that the US military Central Command has actually denied. And the latest exchange of strikes underline the lack of political progress in resolving the Middle East crisis. Now, we have some more information in our report that we're going to go to right now to give us more details in relation to this top story.
Gulf tensions escalated sharply on Wednesday as Iranian missiles and drones targeted sites linked to US interests across the region. US Central Command said 2 missiles fired toward Kuwait fell short or broke apart in flight, while 3 missiles heading for Bahrain were intercepted. Several other ballistic missiles aimed at regional targets also failed. CENTCOM said US forces downed Iranian drones targeting civilian ships in Gulf waters and American forces in Kuwait. It also carried out strikes on Iran's Qeshm Island near the Strait of Hormuz after what it described as attempted Iranian missile and drone attacks. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps said it had targeted the US 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, along with an airbase and helicopters in another regional country. The IRGC said the attacks were a response to a US strike on a communications tower south of Qeshm. The latest escalation lifted oil prices by more than 1% in early trading. It comes more than 3 months after the initial US and Israeli strikes on Iran, with the conflict still locked in a stalemate under a fragile ceasefire, and the Strait of Hormuz largely closed to maritime traffic. Although Washington and Tehran said last week they had reached a tentative agreement to end the war, the deal has not been finalized. Iranian media report there has been no contact with the United States for several days, while President Donald Trump says negotiations are continuing. The IRGC says its forces remain on the highest level of alert and insists Iran's military strength and control of the Strait of Hormuz remain intact.
Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the Trump administration does not want Afghans stranded in Qatar to be forced back to Afghanistan, adding that Washington has spoken with at least 5 countries that may be willing to receive them. Here's what he had to say.
And so we're engaging every single day, and we think we have a number of other countries that are willing to. Now, the question is not countries willing to assume. The question is how many. We have about 1,000-something people there, and we have to move them. And so I don't think there's one country that's going to take all 1,000. But it has to be countries that, A, are willing to assume some of this responsibility in numbers that are manageable to them, but also places that give more options to these individuals that they would be comfortable going to. So we are very actively engaged in this. As you know, we have a lot of Capitol Hill engagement on this issue from both sides of the aisle. It's a priority for a lot of people. And we don't want to see a situation where any of them are being forced back into Afghanistan, because that's just clearly not an option for some of them.
Turning now to tensions in the Middle East, and following a partial ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, representatives from both sides have met for talks in Washington. This comes as hostilities between the neighboring countries continue to be reported. Here's more.
Representatives from Lebanon and Israel met at the US Department of State on Tuesday for the first session of a 2-day round of negotiations. Following the meeting, the United States said progress had been made in the discussions. The talks come amid escalating tensions between the 2 neighbours who have been engaged in a 3-month war. Israel continued its attacks in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, but did not strike Beirut following a partial ceasefire agreement with the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah. The Israeli military also said it had intercepted 2 projectiles fired into northern Israel. A Lebanese official said the talks in Washington would explore ways to strengthen the fragile ceasefire, possibly through a phased approach. According to the official, the discussions could lead to the establishment of pilot zones, geographic areas where hostilities would cease, Israeli troops would withdraw, and Lebanese soldiers would be deployed. Meanwhile, a United Nations peacekeeper vehicle convoy was seen near the Israel-Lebanon border on Tuesday, while an Israeli military presence remained in the area. The developments come after UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said peacekeepers would be needed in Lebanon after the current mission's mandate expires at the end of the year.
Now to East Asia, and torrential rain has brought by tropical storm lashed Tokyo on Wednesday morning, with some rivers along the central area overflowing. At least 16 people were injured and thousands left without power after Storm Tangmu blew through Okinawa on Monday. At least 700 domestic and international flights were grounded at 2 of Tokyo's airports, according to local media. Evacuation and landslide warnings have been issued for parts of Japan's eastern coastal region. Now, the first ever visit by a Hong Kong chief executive to Kazakhstan is said to constitute an important milestone in bilateral relations between Central Asia's largest economy and Hong Kong, a special administrative region of China with which Astana has developed its own strategic relationship. Joining me now to further discuss this is Qeshm, Professor of Chinese Institute of Arab States, Ningxia University, Almaty in Kazakhstan. Welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is, China is already one of Kazakhstan's most important economic partners and sources of investment. What additional value does Hong Kong bring to the relationship, and what advantages could Hong Kong offer to Kazakhstan that may differ from those available through mainland China?
I mean, let's not forget, the Kazakhstan is one of the most important countries in terms of the security, economic, politics for China. This recent agreement signed during the Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee's visit to Astana, a meeting with President Tokayev, suggests that bilateral relations are entering new phase. It's very interesting, actually. When I came here last year, I did a survey with my students. Almost 82% of the students strongly agree China is the influence in Kazakhstan and in Central Asia, more than the United States, more than Russia. To understand the significance of Kazakhstan and Hong Kong partnership, we must first understand the emergence of what many people call the Euro-Asian center. During the 19th century, global power was largely centered in Europe. The 20th century was often described as the American century. Today, however, the center of the gravity of the world economy is increasingly shifting toward Eurasia, particularly Asia. And Kazakhstan understands this very well, especially Kazakh government. I mean, both fastest growing economies, largest infrastructure projects, major manufacturing centers, the expanding technological ecosystem are increasingly concentrated across the Eurasian continent, from Russia to China, and Korea to Vietnam. From China to India, the Gulf states, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, we are witnessing the rise of interconnected economic corridors that are shaping the global trade and investment and pattern space. And this emerging Eurasian center, Central Asia is no longer peripheral. Instead, it's became strategic crossroad linking East Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Russia, Kazakhstan, largest economy in Central Asia, occupies particularly important position in this transformation action.
Well, in that sense,
it serves as a
yes, sir. You've really kind of put a whole kind of information catalogue of everything that's going on, and clearly Kazakhstan is a key partner to China. But just on that, Kazakhstan has articulated an ambition to become the leading financial, technological and digital centre of Central Asia. Now, what contribution could Hong Kong make to this particular effort?
I mean, Hong Kong, especially in terms of the financial experience, Hong Kong will contribute to Kazakhstan, not just for Hong Kong. Singapore, UAE also contribute to, this development of Kazakhstan. Against this backdrop, recent agreements between Kazakhstan and Hong Kong are especially significant. They represent not merely bilateral partnership, but parts of the broader process of the Eurasian integration, involving finance, technology, especially the Hong Kong side, logistics, innovation, and connectivity. Hong Kong's role as a global financial center complements Kazakhstan's position as a Euro-Asian transport and investment hub. Together, they are helping build new network that reflects realities of the new more interconnected and increasingly Asia-centered world, actually.
And to what extent then should this visit be viewed as a bilateral development, and what is, I guess, to what extent as well, it's part of the broader Chinese strategy to deepen economic engagement with Central Asia at a time when the region is also attracting growing attention from multiple global powers? You mentioned that China is very close with Kazakhstan, but do you think that could develop into other areas, especially not only in Central Asia, but also to the Caucasus?
Oh, definitely, especially from through the Kazakhstan to Aktau, to Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia. It will create different kind of new Silk Road that Chinese has been trying to create, that or revitalize the old Silk Road through the Belt and Road Initiative. But this visit represents more than routine diplomatic exchange. Actually, recent visit of Hong Kong chief, it signals the emergence of the strategic partnership, connecting Central Asia's largest economy with one of the world's most important international financial innovation hubs. I mean, Tokayev described this visit as providing new momentum for both Kazakhstan and Hong Kong relations and broader Kazakhstan-China cooperation.
And now you mentioned the connectivity parts. Let's take a closer look at that, just because the Belt and the Road Initiative that has basically been there. Can Kazakhstan and Hong Kong cooperation serve as a bridge between Chinese capital, Central Asian transit potential as well? What opportunities does this create for the wider region in all of that?
I mean, several important agreements were signed. In the financial sector, the Astana International Financial Center, for example, reached cooperation agreement with the Hong Kong Trade Development Council, Hong Kong exchanges and clearing, and invest in Hong Kong. These agreements aim to facilitate, these are the financial part, facilitate the investment flows, financial cooperation, business connectivity between Central Asia, Caucasus, and global markets and Europe. Perhaps even more importantly, Kazakhstan's Astana Hub signed cooperation agreement with Hong Kong Cyberport, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation, Hong Kong and Shenzhen, this is related to China, Innovation and Technology Park. These partnerships will help startups enter new markets, attract venture capital, and establish innovation networks linking Central Asia, Caucasus, Europe with the East Asia.
Yes, it's something that I'm sure China has been planning, and also to kind of develop and further push its influence over Central Asia and, as you mentioned, the Caucasus there. Now, given Kazakhstan's growing connectivity, especially with Azerbaijan through the Middle Corridor, might we eventually see Hong Kong become more interested in the wider Caspian and South Caucasus economic space? We kind of touched upon it, but I just want to go there a bit further because of adding another dimension to China's presence and influence across the region. Do you think Hong Kong will also be a driver in that?
No, definitely. I mean, Hong Kong will be driver of the especially financial center of the Asia is in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen Technology Hub, and Singapore. They are all trying to invest in Central Asia and Caucasus. For example, startup agreements may be among the most important outcomes of this visit. They provide soft landing support for technology firms seeking access markets in the Hong Kong, not just to Hong Kong, but also Shenzhen, Chinese city, to Central Asia and beyond in Caucasus. For young entrepreneurs in Kazakhstan, this creates new opportunities to connect also in Azerbaijan, in Eurasia, in Caucasus, and this creates new opportunities to connect to global innovations, ecosystem, investors, and technology partners.
Right. Well, so interesting, and we'll definitely pay closer attention to how those relations go with Hong Kong and Kazakhstan in the coming weeks as well. So thank you very much for joining me this morning, Mr. Qeshm, on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we turn over to the UK, and hundreds in the city port of Southampton have come out in protest after an 18-year-old man was stabbed and later died in handcuffs at the scene last December. Henry Nowak was fatally stabbed by 23-year-old Vikram Digwa, who was sentenced to life in prison on Monday. Recent police body cam footage shows Nowak telling officers he had been stabbed and could not breathe, while an officer appeared to doubt his injuries, which sparked strong criticism. on British policing. Digwear had falsely claimed he was the victim of a racist attack. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says there are serious questions about whether those allegations influenced police actions.
For his parents, for his family, and everybody who knew him. And I have seen the body.
Now we head down to East Africa, and 2 people have been shot dead in Kenya protests against a US-backed plan to establish a proposed Ebola quarantine facility in the central part of Kenya. The proposal has sparked public anger, a court case and street demonstrations, with locals saying that they fear the facility could put the community at risk.
Hundreds of people protested in Nanyuki, central Kenya on Monday, against plans to establish an Ebola quarantine facility at a nearby military base. The demonstrations brought parts of the town to a standstill, with protesters burning tyres, blocking roads and chanting "one term" as they marched through the streets. Police in anti-riot gear were deployed as tensions grew. Residents say they reject the proposed quarantine centre and do not want it placed near their community.
We are not happy with the national government and the leaders of Laikipia County, all elected leaders. There is none that has shown up for the protest, because this is a great tragedy not only for Kenya, but the whole continent of Africa.
The planned facility has been described in reports as a 50-bed quarantine centre for US citizens who may have been exposed to Ebola. Kenya's High Court has temporarily suspended the plan after legal challenges raised concerns over public health risks and consultation.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. Now to a very quick break. When I return, I have a lot more stories to share. Stay with me. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's head over to the EU for some extra news about what's going on there, because Hungary's new government is stepping up efforts to rebuild ties with both Kyiv and Brussels. Its Prime Minister Peter Major says a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky could happen soon. Let's hear from our correspondent Anita Sharma with this story.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar says he's ready to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as early as next week. But the talks hinge on resolving a years-long dispute over the rights of Hungary's ethnic minority in western Ukraine. If an agreement can be reached, the meeting would mark the highest level contact between Budapest and Kyiv since Magyar's landslide election victory ended Viktor Orban's 16-year rule in April. Speaking alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in Berlin, Magyar said he's optimistic that negotiations can produce a breakthrough. The minority rights issue has long been one of the biggest obstacles to Hungary backing Ukraine's path toward EU membership. Now, Merz welcomed the improvement in relations between Budapest and Kyiv, but argued that the dispute should not be allowed to delay Ukraine's accession talks. The German Chancellor also praised Hungary's return to what he called democratic and European values. The two leaders discussed Ukraine's future relationship with the EU as Kyiv continues its push toward membership. The proposed meeting with Zelensky comes as Magyar intensifies efforts to bring Hungary back into the European mainstream after years of tensions with Brussels under Orban. Following talks with Merz in Berlin, Magyar is set to meet French President Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace today. The diplomatic push has already helped secure the release of 16.4 billion euros in previously frozen EU funds. If Hungary and Ukraine can resolve their differences over minority rights, a Magyar-Zelensky meeting would not only reset relations between the two neighbors, but also underscore Hungary's broader return to the heart of European politics. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Over to the US, and a new diplomatic push is underway to prevent the Lebanon conflict from triggering a wider regional crisis. But fighting on the ground continues to complicate those efforts. Our correspondent Tony Waterman has more from Washington.
This is the fourth round of negotiations between Israel and Lebanon since April, this time
at the ambassador level, with Tuesday's talks lasting about 7 hours at the State Department here in Washington. The talks are coming after weeks of escalating violence between Israeli forces and Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, despite a U.S. brokered ceasefire that was extended by 45 days just last month. A senior Lebanese official telling Reuters that the 2 days of talks in Washington would explore ways to reinforce that ceasefire, possibly through phased approaches. According to Reuters, this could include so-called pilot zones, these carved out blocks of land where the hostilities would stop, Israeli troops would withdraw, replaced by Lebanese soldiers, and gradually this would spread across Lebanon, block by block, until there was a nationwide ceasefire. The biggest sticking point, though, remains Hezbollah, the Iran proxy operating in Lebanon and designated a terrorist group by the United States. It started this war in the days following the U.S. and Israel attacking Iran, but it is not part of these negotiations. Israel wants Hezbollah disarmed, but Lebanon is insisting that Israel first halt military operations and withdraw from the south of the country, where more than 1.2 million people have been displaced in the fighting. And that fighting continued on Tuesday morning, despite both Israel and Hezbollah promising President Trump on Monday that they would dial back the attacks. This conflict is now threatening to derail efforts to bring the war in Iran to an end. Iran's semi-official news agency Tansim on Monday reported that Tehran was suspending talks with the United States, citing Israel's ongoing attacks in Lebanon and really insisting that any peace deal with the United States include a ceasefire in Lebanon. That really kicked off a flurry of phone calls. President Trump demanding Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stop attacks on Beirut, which he did agree to, although he said operations in southern Lebanon will continue. There have been reports in U.S. media that President Trump angrily confronted Netanyahu over these threats to attack Beirut. Axios saying that Trump used expletives and called Netanyahu crazy. So really highlighting here this growing rift over how to end not just the war in southern Lebanon, but also in Iran, and the challenge that President Trump is facing when it comes to making sure this conflict doesn't spread across the Middle East. Tony Waterman for A News, Washington.
Now we head over for some lighter news, and the opening of an art installation on the Paris Pont Neuf bridge has been postponed after strong winds damaged part of the structure. The installation covers the oldest standing bridge and one of the city's best known landmarks. The work, called La Caverne du Pont Neuf, was created by French artist Jair. It used printed fabric to make the bridge look as if it was covered by large rock formations. It was due to open to the public on Saturday, but organizers say a new date will be set after technicians inspect the damage. Well, it does look very rocky, doesn't it? I would like to see that art installation, but the weather, you can never tell with what's going on. So hopefully it will definitely stand the test of time. Well, those are all the top stories for the morning. Please make sure you stay with A News as we provide you with more information on the leading headlines throughout the course of the day. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow to go through the morning headlines. Take care.